If Trey Harris can't go, Juice Wells is going to become a star versus LSU. Just watch.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, it's all about what to watch for this week, specifically the health of Trey Harris, who's arguably the best wide receiver in all of college football. But if he's not 100%, Lane Kiffin and Jaxson Dart have plenty of options. With weapons like Juice Wells and Jordan Watkins, there's no shortage of talent ready to step up. If Wells is called upon, keep an eye out for a star turn, especially if his performances against Tennessee and Clemson in 2022 were any indication. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy provide other perspectives on college football, the SEC, and even Ole Miss. So check it out. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So I guess we can say this is Hurricane Eve, maybe Hurricane Day. Roughly about 8 or 9 o'clock tonight, it should be right off the coast of Tampa. So I'll be getting tropical storm force winds at that point. But we are going to try and do some stuff today. Like if we have time and what's going on, we may even try and get a Bill Flowers interview and get that scheduled out as well. We're going to have something from Spencer McLaughlin on Wednesday. We're going to have the normal squad show that I'm not going to be a part of on Thursday. And then we are going to have potentially Bill Flowers or something like that on Friday night. So we might have a fairly booked up week, which is honestly a testament for how much I've worked this week. So anyway, in this game, where all the stories and all the eyes are going to be on the health of Trey Harris. And there's a whole lot of different things going around. And I understand why, honestly. There's several reasons. One, this game means absolutely everything for Trey Harris. So, of course, if anybody asks, he's going to say he's going to play in that game. That doesn't mean that he is. And Lane Kiffin needs LSU to be preparing for Trey Harris or not preparing for Trey Harris, vague and trying to do everything to cut down on that practice time and the effectiveness of it. So you're not going to hear anything on the injury status of Trey Harris. It's all going to be rumors and innuendos, both one direction and the other. So if that happens, you're going to have a situation where Ole Miss needs to find somebody else. So what to watch for in this game is Jordan Watkins and Juice Wells will be the final attack plan against LSU. And Juice Wells potentially has a chance to take a major star turn in this ball game if he gets this opportunity. Also, Pete Golding may have figured something out in the fourth quarter of last year's game. And third of all, Ole Miss is going to look differently in this LSU game, but not necessarily on the field or play-wise. They just might look differently. We'll talk about that as well. So in this game, I do expect that if Trey Harris can't go, Juice Wells is going to take a star turn in this game. And the reason I say that is a couple of fold. First of all, Juice Wells has the absolute talent. If you go back to the 2022 season when Juice Wells was last healthy against Clemson and Tennessee at the end of the year, he completely opened up both of those teams and was a menace on the outside. So much so that when the 2023 season started, he was first team All SEC as a wide receiver. He's a really good player, extremely gifted athlete, and an aggressive wide receiver. That doesn't bode well against an LSU secondary that's, let's just say, young. We'll just go with young for the time being. And that aggressiveness means that he is going to probably win a lot of one-on-ones. If LSU decides to man cover, he's probably going to win that one-on-one. LSU is going to have to shade everything to him, and they're going to have to treat him as if Trey Harris is in the game if he is playing and Trey Harris is not. So he is going to affect everything on that defense. There's not going to be a play where they just man up and play normal, honest football against Juice Wells if Trey Harris cannot go. And that means him dominating the attention in that he's still probably going to catch 120 yards worth of balls, 130 yards worth of balls, 4 or 5 catches. The way that Lane Kiffin feeds his stars, because he genuinely feeds his stars. I think Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M, that was the whole thing, is like Bobby Petrino's like, we're going to feed the stars. And then he didn't, because he was essentially running Jimbo's playbook. Lane Kiffin feeds the stars. If you have any doubt of that, look at Trey Harris's number. He has like 52 catches for 885 yards and 5 touchdowns through 6 games this season, through half of the season. He's on pace for 1,700 yards, and this is with him getting injured in the second quarter of the South Carolina game. So Juice Wells is going to be fed. Lane Kiffin is going to feed him in this ball game, which means he'll have a chance to put up the numbers that are required for a star turn. The other thing is if LSU just goes completely and slants their defense towards Juice Wells, that's going to open up the players like Jordan Watkins, who is likely going to be playing on the other side. The way this offense works is there's basically a top 5 list of wide receivers. There's just a ranking of them. They all play every position on the formation. But the way it goes, the number 1 receiver is the number 1 receiver. That's normally Trey Harris. Then there's number 2. That's probably Juice Wells. Number 3 is Jordan Watkins. Number 4 is Cayden Lee. And what happens is it just goes in order of those top 3 players play. And before everybody freaks out about that from time to time, for years we talk about, hey, let's get the best players on the field to play. Now, sure, Ole Miss fans want depth. They spent a lot of money in the transfer portal. They've done all of that, accumulating all this massive amount of debt. And Ole Miss still not playing the number of players that I guess fans want them to play is at least problematic. But if everything goes the way it normally does, Ole Miss is not going to substitute very much. Juice Wells is going to go up to that number 1 spot. He is going to get 8 to 15 targets in the course of the game. And if he performs, he has a chance to have massive, massive numbers. So Juice Wells in that case is probably going to have a star turn in this game. Now, I do look for Jordan Watkins to have a very significant role in this game. He kind of got right against South Carolina for the first time this year. I expect him to be Mr. Reliable. If you remember, last year, Jordan Watkins was the reliable person that Jaxson Dart kept on going to whenever he absolutely needed a catch. This season, it's been Trey Harris. It's been all Trey Harris. But you will see, I think, Jaxson Dart kind of fall back into that Mr. Reliable role with Jordan Watkins in this LSU game. I think you'll see Jordan Watkins used a lot like Dayton Wade was a year ago, and I think Cayden Lee in the middle of the field is going to be somebody to watch as well. Now, don't forget about Caden Priest corner, Daquan Wright. They could have a role to play as well, as we talked about yesterday. But this is how I think the wide receiver room is going to look in this ball game. And I think that Juice Wells could end up with 8 catches for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. This is the type of game that I expect Juice Wells to have in this ball game. Now, we'll talk about the running game and all that as we move forward in the week. But the passing game is in very good hands with or without Trey Harris. Now, does everything get easier if Trey Harris is on the field? Yeah, he's potentially the best wide receiver in all of college football. But the drop-off isn't as sharp as it would have been even a year ago, as we saw whenever Trey Harris missed games at Alabama and Georgia Tech, to where Jordan Watkins and Dayton Wade were the options at wide receiver. With Juice Wells, that adds a little bit more of a physical thump at the wide receiver position. Should be pretty interesting indeed. So has Pete Golding cracked the code on LSU's high-powered offense? In last year's fourth quarter, the Rebels defense stepped up. Could that be the key to another victory? Stay tuned for our breakdown. Hey, Ole Miss fans, you can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, Ole Miss is currently favored over LSU, I think, by 3.5 points on FanDuel. And in the game Saturday night, if you notice part of today's show or yesterday's show becoming real, you can actually do something about it. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the latest live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. So Pete Golding in the fourth quarter of the game against LSU a year ago gave up one touchdown, but this was the Jayden Daniels offense. This was the super elite, historic level offense. This was those guys with first-round receivers all over the place, the way they were played. Jayden Daniels actually played a really good football game in Oxford, Mississippi last year. But Pete Golding was able to stop that LSU offense 3 out of their last 4 possessions. 2 punts, and the game ended. That's how they got their stops. And it makes me wonder if this is kind of like the baseball relievers that you kind of see, like whenever you play Cleveland over and over again, eventually those relievers are going to start to look more normal. It's going to slow down a little bit. You're going to be able to hit the ball, and they're not going to be as effective as they normally would be. Is this happening with Pete Golding? Because Pete Golding has seen 2 of the better LSU offenses that Brian Kelly has put out, and potentially LSU has put out with Jayden Daniels in 2022 and 2023. In 2022, it was with Alabama. So there was players on the field that were big-time type players. And Jayden Daniels won the game in that one against Alabama. It was the 2-point conversion play to Mason Taylor. LSU was able to pull off that victory. Against LSU in Oxford, in the beginning, they had a decent plan. They got a turnover, I think, and a stop in the first quarter for a 21-7 lead, but had to come back from 9 points down in the fourth quarter to win the game. So the middle part of the game did not go particularly well for Pete Golding, but the fourth quarter went really well. They did some different stuff. They used Santarin Perkins, Kari Coleman to spy Jayden Daniels, which honestly was not that effective of a spy because of how good of an athlete he is. And then those guys on the outside, it was just a corner mismatch to where Ole Miss went out and said, hey, we got to get people that can cover man-to-man. Go get a Trey Amos. Go get these guys to play on the outside because we need them. Those guys are gone at LSU. They're still running the same offense, but there are aspects of the offense that are not necessarily as dangerous as it was a year ago. For instance, Garrett Nussmeier is not a threat to take off and run the football. You can 2-man LSU now this year. You could not do it a year ago. You could do it last year. And 2-man means 2 deep zone coverage on the back end, but playing man underneath. So you have 2 safeties over the top of playing a man defense. It's the defense that Alabama has made famous over the last 15 years or so. Well, maybe not so right now, but you get my point. This year, you can actually 2-man that defense. The running game is not as pronounced. The 100-yard rusher that LSU had a year ago is now on Ole Miss's roster. And Logan Diggs, he's probably not going to play in this game, but starting at about the Arkansas game, you should fire up the clock for looking for him to making an impact on the field. So it's really interesting what this defense can do and what the lessons learned from Pete Golding in those Jayden Daniels situations. And you also have a Zach Arnett on the field that went against those defenses just the same. It kind of is interesting how they're going to line up against LSU and play ball. Because Ole Miss defensively this year, they're leading the nation in sacks. And it's not particularly close. They're leading the SEC, I think, by 9 or something like that. Tackles for loss, they're off the chart as well. The quarterback pressure is off the chart as well. But on the flip side of that is what makes this Ole Miss defense so good is LSU does a good job of protecting the quarterback. They have 2 really elite tackles, and Garrett Nussmeier is really good at getting the ball out of his hands. So they do not get the quarterback sacked very often. Can Ole Miss affect him? And I talked about this yesterday. if you can affect Garrett Nussmeier, not necessarily sack him because he is good at getting the ball out of his hands, but affect him to where he has to worry about the rush and that internal clock instead of saying, hey, I got 3 seconds to throw the ball down the field. Hey, I've got 1.8 seconds. This needs to come out pretty quick. And then Ole Miss can do the 2-man type stuff with the 2D safeties over the top. And I think you can shut down this offense pretty well. The lessons that Pete Golding learned against LSU in that fourth quarter is going to be massive, especially with how you handle a non-mobile pocket passer and the way they do that, and the lessons that Pete Golding learned with Nick Saban. It's crazy to think that with Kirby Smart and Pete Golding being the flag bearers for defense in the SEC, everybody is moving away from defense. You have a situation where Ole Miss might have the best defensive team in the entire Southeastern Conference this year. And a lot of that is because everybody's just kind of getting away. If you look at what Alabama's doing, they've given up like 70 points in the last 6 quarters, and 4 of them were to Vandy. I mean, there's no way to bounce back from that. None at all. So we'll see exactly how that goes. But Pete Golding, I think, learned some lessons in that LSU game as far as schematically how to deal with that offense, because LSU does do some schematic things a little bit different on offense. They just do. It might look different or look the same to where they're running out of the shotgun and 10 personnel and 11 personnel and what they're doing. But what they do on the offensive line and what they do in the pass game, it's a little bit different in the concepts of what they're doing. And so teams have a little bit of trouble with that. When you add in a super athlete like Jayden Daniels, people have a lot of trouble with that. But this LSU team, and this particular LSU team, they put 42 points on South Alabama. They struggled before they pulled away late against UCLA, a team that got absolutely boat raced by Indiana. I think they scored 42 points or something like that against Nicholls State, gave up 21. They lost to USC, which increasingly looks like a bad loss. I think they took an L to Minnesota just a week ago, and there's more on the way for the people out now, LA. So this LSU offense, I think that Pete Golding's in good shape with this LSU offense. They're going to score some points because they're good at scoring points, and they do stuff that's a little bit out of the ordinary, and they have really good athletes on their team because LSU teams offensively, especially at wide receiver, have good athletes. But I think it's going to be harder for the LSU offense going against that Ole Miss defense than it is for the Ole Miss offense going against the LSU defense. I think in one case you have the irresistible force and the immovable object as far as LSU's offense versus Ole Miss's defense. But the other side, you completely have the movable object against the irresistible force. And I think that LSU is going to be under a lot of pressure to score points. And if anybody remembers what's going on in this game, and this is going to be an advantage Pete Golding, LSU is going to face a little bit what 2018 Ole Miss faced and what got them in trouble, to where you just absolutely have to keep scoring. The offense is amazing, but if you don't score and you get your serve broken, the other team's going to win the game. And that's the reason why Ole Miss went 6-6 those years, because they just couldn't keep scoring. It's interesting to see exactly what happens. Now, I am curious offensively what will happen because Henry Parrish took a knock on his shoulder. How does that look? Matt Jones injured his ankle. Now, Ole Miss has a couple of 1,000-yard running backs on the bench, but I digress on that. We're not going to get into that just right now, but we'll see exactly how that goes. Ole Miss is going to look different this year when their normal LSU uniforms, they're off the table. We dive into what used to be the best looking football game in the entire country and why this year's matchup could reclaim that title. Don't miss it. Game Time is the place to get your Ole Miss tickets with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from receipts, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. there's no bad seat from Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, but Game Time allows you to see the view from every seat in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium before you buy the ticket. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. Take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might even be able to help you out with tickets too. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So Ole Miss is going to look a little bit different whenever they play in Baton Rouge. Well, at least different than we've seen in the last 4 years. And that is because the uniform combinations that Ole Miss has worn down there, they're off the table. Ole Miss has worn powder blue helmets and powder blue jerseys down in Tiger Stadium and in every single home game that Ole Miss has played against LSU. They've worn white helmets with red jerseys one time in 2022. Both of those are gone. Ole Miss wore the white-red combination, I think, against Georgia Southern, and they wore the powder combination against Kentucky, I believe. So both of those are completely off the table, which leads to an interesting situation. If we just want to be honest about it, the classics are still on the table. The uniforms that made Ole Miss and LSU the best looking uniform game in all of college football, they're on the table. Will Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss wear them is the question. Will Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss want to change it up a little bit and go navy gray for a classic look on the road in Tiger Stadium? Both of those combinations are available to Ole Miss. Now, what I think is going to probably happen is a white helmet, a powder jersey, and a white pant, because that feels like something that would happen. It just does, especially whenever in the home games coming up this season, you have Oklahoma, which is the real tree game. You have Georgia, which is a massive game, which I think is going to be one of the classics. And then you have the Mississippi State game, which Ole Miss generally wears classic uniforms for that game, and specifically the navies when they're at home. Whenever they're on the road, they wear the white jerseys and gray pants as well. So if we're looking at this honestly, and if we want to take an honest look at what's going on, Ole Miss is either wearing the white helmets and the powder jerseys, or they're going to have some semblance of a classic uniform as far as the OGs, the navy helmets, the red jerseys, and the gray pants, which would be the absolute best looking game that you could have in Tiger Stadium. All right, so just everybody knows tonight the hurricane is supposed to come through, and I'm likely to lose power for some period of time. So I'm trying to get all my shows for the week done by tomorrow night or by tonight. And if that gets done, we will have fairly close to full coverage. It might look a little bit different. Just bear with me on that. I'm not expecting anything catastrophic. I think Tampa is going to get hit pretty good, but I'm not expecting anything nuts. The eye is going to go right by my house. So I'm expecting it to be at least hopefully 10 to 15 miles away from my house, because this eye wall is not exactly large at the moment. And if it's not large, it makes things a little bit easier. I think it's going to be a category 3 whenever it hits the land. I think it's going to be a category 1 or a low category 2 by the time it goes over my house, but it'll be moving very quickly at that point. It should hit about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning this morning. So by the time you hear me talking with Matt Moscona on Thursday, we will already know if the hurricane has gone through. Like I said, the videos are going to be done for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and I'm looking to get John Forcade for Tuesday night, as that aired last night, if that happened, and I'm looking to get hopefully Bill Flowers for Friday. There's probably not going to be a pre-game show unless I do have power and everything in the end of the week to where I can interview Michael Katz. And hopefully I'll have power by Saturday to where I can do my live streams and my instant overreactions, but I'm not missing this ball game. At the worst, you'll get my thoughts on my phone. I'm going to find a way to see it on Saturday, and that's absolutely the case. So we're getting ready to hunker down here tonight, get everything ready to go. I hope everybody is safe. That if you're in the path of that, if you've evacuated, I hope you get to where you're going. And tonight, I am planning on, I don't know if I'll still have power, but if I still have power, I'm still planning on doing SEC After Dark, which is at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. So tropical storm and hurricane should be getting close to the area, and I should be live streaming at that point. So I'm looking at live streaming to the last possible moment. So we'll see how it goes for everyone there, and specifically me. So thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss sports podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On College Football Podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, sponsor McLaughlin, get you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. We have a video coming up this week of that. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't even need to search. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. Our texting program sends you notifications on everything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We're constantly adding new perks as we grow, so don't miss out. The link is down in the description as well. And for those of you watching on YouTube, we're going to send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.